Look at the loaf of bread on the modern kitchen counter. The loaf looks perfect. The crust is uniformly golden. The crumb is impossibly soft. The packaging promises sustenance and tradition. Now, look at the reality of the modern body. The bloating that begins 30 minutes after a meal. The sudden lethargy that drags the limbs down. The brain fog that feels like a heavy veil dropping over the mind. Millions of modern consumers believe the human body is allergic to gluten. Millions believe that wheat itself is the ancient enemy of human health. But this belief is a calculated lie. The wheat is not the enemy. The process is the enemy. Consider the medieval peasant in the year 1250 AD. This individual performed back-breaking labor from sunrise to sunset. The peasant did not have protein shakes. The peasant did not have vitamin supplements. The primary fuel of the medieval workforce was bread. A medieval laborer consumed up to 1.5 kilograms of dark, dense, coarse bread every single day. By modern medical standards, this massive intake of gluten and carbohydrates should have destroyed the digestive system of the peasant. The population should have been crippled by chronic inflammation and autoimmune collapse. Yet, historical records and bioarchaeology show something disturbing. The medieval population did not suffer from the chronic gut inflammation that plagues the modern world. The bread of the past was not a burden. The bread was a source of immense, sustainable power. The difference is not found in the grain, but in the time. The modern loaf of bread is a lie wrapped in plastic. The modern loaf is a biological weapon of mass convenience. The medieval loaf was a slow-release capsule of nutrition. The reason the modern consumer feels sick is simple. The industrial baking industry has removed the most expensive ingredient in bread making. That ingredient is time. This reality brings the investigation to the scandal of the supermarket shelf. Walk down the aisle and find the bread labeled sourdough. The price is double the cost of the white loaf. The packaging uses rustic fonts and images of old stone mills. The label claims the product is traditional. The label claims the product is healthy. But turn the package over. Read the ingredient list in the fine print. If the list contains the words commercial yeast, ascorbic acid, or vinegar, the consumer is holding a fake product. The consumer is holding a standard white chemical sponge that has been dyed brown with caramel color and flavored with acetic acid to mimic the tartness of genuine fermentation. This object is not food. This object is a laboratory trick designed to fool the palate while destroying the gut. The baking industry calls this efficiency. The medieval baker would call this poison. True sourdough is not a flavor profile. True sourdough is a biological process of pre-digestion. When the modern factory skips this process to save money, the factory forces the human stomach to do work the stomach was never designed to do. The industry has secretly shifted the burden of digestion from the fermentation vat to the human intestine. And the human intestine is failing. The modern response to this digestive collapse is not to fix the bread. The response is to create a new market. Observe the explosion of the gluten-free industry. This is a market worth over $6 billion annually. The market thrives on fear. The market sells cardboard-textured substitutes filled with xanthan gum, tapioca starch, and refined sugars at triple the price of wheat. This is the ultimate irony of the 21st century. The consumer pays a premium to avoid a nutrient that sustained the Roman legions. The problem is not the protein known as gluten. The problem is the industrial violence inflicted upon the grain. When a modern factory produces a loaf of sandwich bread, the goal is not nutrition. The goal is shelf life and volume. The factory uses high-speed mixers that whip air into the dough at thousands of revolutions per minute. This technique is called the Chorleywood bread process. The process allows a loaf to go from flour to packaged plastic in less than 3 hours. But in this violent rush, the biology is ignored. The wild yeasts are never given the chance to wake up. The bacteria are never given the time to neutralize the natural defenses of the plant. The result is that the modern human eats raw grain disguised as cooked bread. The stomach becomes a battlefield. The immune system attacks the undigested proteins, leading to leaky gut syndrome, a condition where the intestinal lining becomes permeable, allowing toxins to leak into the bloodstream. This is why the modern population feels perpetually tired. The body is fighting a civil war against breakfast. Contrast this reality with the peasant of the 13th century. The life of the peasant was hard, dirty, and short by modern standards of hygiene. But the food was alive. The black bread of the serf was a living ecosystem. The bread was heavy. The bread was sour. The bread was hard to chew. But that hardness was necessary. The density signaled that the nutrients were intact. The modern white loaf is soft because the loaf is dead. The loaf dissolves in the mouth like sugar because the loaf is sugar. The glycemic index of modern instant yeast bread rivals the glycemic index of a candy bar. The bread spikes insulin, crashes energy, and leaves the body starving for real nourishment. We have traded the slow, dark, complex nutrition of the past for a fast, white, sugary illusion. And the modern population is paying for this trade with chronic inflammation. The industry knows this fact. The industry knows that real fermentation requires space and time, two things that reduce profit margins. So the industry sells the lie. The industry sells the gluten sensitivity narrative to hide the bad bread reality. It is time to stop blaming the grain. It is time to blame the greed. Stop for a moment. Go to the kitchen pantry. Pick up the bread currently being eaten by the family. Look at the label. Is the bread real, or is the bread a chemistry experiment? If the label lists more than 3 ingredients, flour, water, salt, the bread is suspect. If the label lists preservatives, the bread is dead. The knowledge of how to make bread that heals rather than harms was standard survival knowledge for 1,000 years. This knowledge was lost in less than 50. This investigation will expose exactly how the modern bakery cheats the laws of biology and how the medieval method utilized invisible armies of bacteria to unlock the true potential of grain. The stomach is not sensitive. The bread is just raw. To understand the magnitude of the crime committed against the human diet, one must look at the clock. In the medieval bakery, the creation of a single loaf of bread was a rhythm that spanned 24 to 48 hours. It was a slow, deliberate conversation between the baker and the atmosphere. In the modern industrial factory, the timeline has been compressed to less than 60 minutes. This compression is not an innovation. It is a mutilation. The modern method is known as the Corley-Wood bread process, developed in the 1,960 seconds to maximize profit and minimize time. The industrial mixer does not knead the dough, it assaults it. High-speed blades thrash the flour and water with such violence that the gluten network is forced to develop mechanically rather than chemically. To survive this brutal speed, the factory adds a specific biological agent, Saccharomyces cerevisiae. This is commercial baker's yeast. It is a laboratory-isolated strain of fungus selected for one trait and one trait alone: aggressive gas production. Think of commercial yeast as a hyperactive child. When introduced to the dough, it frantically eats the simple sugars and expels carbon dioxide. This gas inflates the dough rapidly, creating the illusion of a loaf. But that is all it does. It pumps air. It does not degrade the complex proteins. It does not neutralize the defense chemicals of the wheat. The modern loaf is essentially a balloon of raw starch, held together by a tight, unyielding net of tough gluten, and sold to the public as food. This brings the investigation to the hidden enemy within the grain: phytic acid. Every kernel of wheat contains phytic acid in its bran. In nature, this acid serves a vital purpose. It locks up the phosphorus, energy, and minerals within the seed, preventing them from being used until the conditions are perfect for germination. It is a preservative lock. When a human eats modern bread made with fast yeast, this lock remains shut. The phytic acid enters the human gut and acts as a chelator. It aggressively binds to minerals like iron, zinc, calcium, and magnesium, stripping them from the body and carrying them out in waste. The modern human is not just eating empty calories. The modern human is eating a substance that actively steals existing nutrients from their bones and blood. The consumer is starving on a full stomach. Now, reverse the timeline to the year 1250. The medieval baker did not have access to commercial yeast packets. They relied on something far more powerful, the leaven, or what is now called the sourdough starter. This was not a monoculture. It was a wild, chaotic, microscopic civilization. A single gram of medieval starter contained a symbiotic army of wild yeasts and, crucially, lactic acid bacteria, specifically the lactobacillus species. This is the scientific secret that the modern world has forgotten. In the medieval bowl, a war was fought for the sake of human digestion. As the dough sat for hours, sometimes days, the wild yeast grew slowly, providing the lift. But the lactobacillus did the heavy labor. These bacteria consumed the maltose and produced organic acids, lactic acid and acetic acid. This acidification of the dough is the key. It drops the pH level of the bread. When the pH drops below 5, a biological miracle occurs. The acidity triggers the activation of an enzyme called phytase. This enzyme is the key that unlocks the phytic acid. It breaks the bond, neutralizing the anti-nutrient and releasing the iron, zinc, and magnesium back into a bioavailable form. The medieval peasant did not need mineral supplements because their bread unlocked the minerals for them. But the work of the bacteria does not stop there. The long fermentation process initiates a phenomenon known as proteolysis. The bacteria produce enzymes that begin to dismantle the gluten protein structures. They break the long, difficult-to-digest gluten chains into shorter, simpler amino acids. This is pre-digestion. By the time the medieval loaf entered the oven, the bacteria had already done 50% of the digestive work. The bread was not just cooked by fire, it was cooked by time and biology. This explains the paradox of the gluten-intolerant generation. The modern gut is being asked to process a protein structure that is biologically raw. The industrial process demands that the human stomach produce enough acid and enzymes to break down what a 24-hour fermentation cycle used to do. The human body is not failing. The human body is being overwhelmed. The modern bakery presents a product that looks like bread, but behaves like an indigestible glue. The flavor itself is the final evidence. Modern bread requires sugar, salt, and bread improvers to taste like anything. Medieval bread tasted of the process. The sourness was not a stylistic choice. It was the taste of safety. The lactic acid that gave the bread its tang also acted as a potent natural preservative. It prevented the growth of mold and pathogenic bacteria. A loaf of medieval sourdough could sit on a wooden table for 10 days and remain safe to eat. A loaf of modern bread, without its chemical preservatives, will grow blue mold in 3 days. One is preserved by life, the other is preserved by death. The modern consumer has been trained to prefer the soft, sweet, white sponge because it is easy. It requires no chewing. It offers an immediate dopamine hit of simple sugar. But this ease is a trap. The gut lining pays the price for the mouth's pleasure. The investigation reveals that we have not improved bread. We have merely optimized it for the trash can. We have stripped away the symbiotic partners, the bacteria that evolved alongside humans for thousands of years to help us eat grass seeds. We fired the workers, and now we wonder why the job is not getting done. The science is irrefutable. The medieval method was an application of biotechnology so advanced that we are only now beginning to understand the mechanisms. They did not call it microbiology. They called it the art. And it was an art that kept civilization alive through plague, famine, and winter. Today, we have the technology to see the bacteria, yet we choose to ignore them. We choose the speed of the machine over the wisdom of the microbe. Skeptics will claim that this is mere nostalgia. They will argue that the medieval method is a romantic fantasy, inefficient for the modern world. But science does not care about nostalgia. Science deals in data, and the data regarding the power of fermentation is devastating to the modern industrial narrative. Consider the landmark study conducted by the Department of Soil, Plant, and Food Sciences at the University of Bari in Italy. Researchers took a group of patients with celiac disease individuals whose bodies violently reject gluten. They fed these patients baked goods made from wheat. But this was not ordinary wheat. This wheat had been subjected to a long-term sourdough fermentation using specific strains of lactobacilli and fungal proteases. The results, published in the journal Clinical Gastroenterology and Hepatology, were shocking. The bacteria had hydrolyzed the gluten protein so thoroughly that the residual gluten content was below 10 parts per million. For context, the international standard for gluten-free labeling is 20 parts per million. The bacteria had rendered the toxic protein harmless. The medieval method had chemically neutralized the threat. This is not an isolated finding. A study published in Applied and Environmental Microbiology confirmed that the acidification process in sourdough increases the solubility of magnesium and phosphorus by up to 70% compared to yeast-leavened bread. The science is clear. The intolerance is not a defect of the human body. The intolerance is a reaction to unfinished chemistry. The industrial loaf is a chemical failure. Archaeology provides the second layer of proof. Excavations in ancient Egypt and the ruins of Pompeii have revealed the remnants of bakeries that operated on this exact principle. But the most compelling evidence is found in the survival of the mother dough, or chef, in European traditions. There are starter cultures in Belgium and San Francisco that have been kept alive, fed, and used continuously for over 150 years. These jars of bubbling paste are biological heirlooms. They are not just ingredients, they are survivors. They have outlived empires, wars, and famines. A packet of commercial yeast dies in the cupboard after a year. A sourdough starter, if treated with respect, is effectively immortal. This is the definition of sustainability. So, how does the modern individual reclaim this lost technology? The process requires no electricity. It requires no specialized equipment. It requires only 3 elements: flour, water, and oxygen. Step 1. The capture. Find a glass jar. A clean, wide-mouthed vessel is best. Do not use metal, as the acid can react with it. Do not use plastic, which harbors bad bacteria in scratches. Use glass. Combine 50 grams of whole grain flour, rye, or whole wheat is superior for the start because these grains carry more wild yeasts on their husks with 50 grams of dechlorinated water. Stir the mixture vigorously. The goal is to incorporate air. The air is filled with wild yeast spores and bacteria. The flour provides the food. The water provides the medium for life. Cover the jar with a cloth or a loose lid to allow the gas to escape, but keep the flies out. Step 2. The cultivation. Place the jar in a warm corner of the kitchen. Now wait. This is the hardest step for the modern mind. For 24 hours, nothing will happen. The mixture is waking up. On day 2, repeat the feeding. Discard half the mixture to keep the volume manageable and add fresh flour and water. By day 3 or 4, the mixture will begin to bubble. It will smell unpleasant at first, like old socks or acetone. Do not panic. This is the war of the microbes. The bad bacteria are fighting the good bacteria. Keep feeding it. By day 7, the smell will change. It will transform into a sweet, yeasty, yogurt-like aroma. The texture will become web-like and frothy. The lactobacillus has won the war. The starter is born. Step 3. The float test. To know if the starter is ready to raise bread, drop a teaspoon of the bubbly mixture into a glass of water. If it floats, it is full of carbon dioxide. It is strong enough to defy gravity. It is ready. The application of this starter changes the economics of survival. A 5-pound bag of premium organic flour costs perhaps $8. This bag can produce 10 large loaves of bread. That is 80 cents per loaf. Compare this to the $5 or $6 charged for a sourdough loaf at the supermarket, a loaf that is likely fake. The math is undeniable. By investing 15 minutes a day in maintaining the culture, the household secures a source of premium nutrition that costs pennies. But the value goes beyond money. When the baker mixes the flour and water with the starter, they are not just cooking. They are participating in a biological rhythm that anchors them to reality. The dough must be folded, not kneaded. It requires gentle strength. It requires waiting for the rise, watching the volume increase by 50%. It requires understanding the temperature of the room. If the kitchen is cold, the dough sleeps. If the kitchen is hot, the dough runs. The baker becomes a scientist of their own environment. The final product is a loaf with a thick, caramelized crust that sings when it cools, a crackling sound known as the song of the bread. The crumb is open, glossy, and moist. The taste is complex, nutty, creamy, with a subtle tang that triggers the salivary glands. One slice of this bread satiates the hunger for hours. It does not cause a sugar crash. It provides sustained energy. This is the food that built cathedrals. This is the food that fueled the crossing of oceans. The modern consumer relies on the supply chain. If the trucks stop, the bread runs out in 3 days. The medieval baker relies on the jar in the cupboard and the sack of grain. As long as there is flour and water, there is bread. This is not just cooking. This is independence. The system wants the population to be dependent on the shelf. The starter culture is a declaration of freedom. It is a small, bubbling revolution in a glass jar. We live in an age that prides itself on intelligence. The modern world possesses smartphones, artificial intelligence, and space telescopes. Yet, the modern world cannot bake a simple loaf of bread without causing a public health crisis. This is the great paradox of our time. We have mastered the microchip, but we have forgotten the microbe. We have conquered the digital realm, but we have surrendered the physical realm. The arrogance of the present leads the modern individual to look back at the medieval era with pity. The modern mind sees the medieval peasant as dirty, ignorant, and superstitious. But look closer at the evidence presented. The medieval peasant understood something the modern industrialist has ignored. The laws of nature cannot be cheated. They can only be negotiated. The medieval baker was not a primitive stumbler. The medieval baker was a master of applied biotechnology. The baker understood that, to feed the village, one must first feed the invisible army in the dough. This is not superstition. This is a profound respect for the complexity of life. The Industrial Revolution convinced humanity that speed is synonymous with progress. It promised that faster is always better. But in the realm of biology, speed is often violence. By forcing the grain to yield in an hour what should take a day, the industry has created a food supply that is hostile to the human body. The modern consumer is fed, but the modern consumer is not nourished. The modern consumer is full, but the modern consumer is hollow. To return to the medieval way is not to reject technology. It is to redefine technology. True technology is not a gadget that disconnects the user from reality. True technology is a tool that deepens the connection between the human and the earth. The sourdough starter is a piece of technology. It is a biological machine that turns grass into fuel, poison into medicine, and labor into sustenance. It is a technology that has stood the test of 10,000 years. The plastic-wrapped loaf has existed for less than a century, and it is already failing us. The choice facing the viewer is not merely about culinary preference. The choice is about agency. To rely solely on the supermarket is to accept the status of a consumer. The word itself, consume, means to use up, to destroy, to waste. The consumer is passive. The consumer is vulnerable. The consumer eats what is given, regardless of the toxicity. The alternative is to become a craftsman. The craftsman produces. The craftsman understands the materials. The craftsman controls the process. When the individual mixes flour and water in a glass jar, the individual steps out of the industrial loop. The individual declares that their health is not for sale. The individual declares that they are willing to invest time to secure quality. Do not let the convenience of the plastic bag silence the wisdom of the gut. The stomach knows the truth. The bloating, the fatigue, the brain fog, these are signals. These are the body begging for a return to reality. The solution is not a pill. The solution is not a new diet trend. The solution is waiting in the air, in the water, and in the grain. The knowledge has been shared. The science has been exposed. The method is simple. The jar is empty. The decision now belongs to the hands that hold the flour. Will those hands remain the hands of a dependent consumer, or will those hands become the hands of a creator? The fire is ready. The dough is waiting. Rise. We live in an age that prides itself on intelligence. The modern world possesses smartphones, artificial intelligence, and space telescopes. Yet, the modern world cannot bake a simple loaf of bread without causing a public health crisis. This is the great paradox of our time. We have mastered the microchip, but we have forgotten the microbe. We have conquered the digital realm, but we have surrendered the physical realm. The arrogance of the present leads the modern individual to look back at the medieval era with pity. The modern mind sees the medieval peasant as dirty, ignorant, and superstitious.